Satanic death cults, accelerationists, and a collapsing reality. This is Inverted World Live. Welcome back to Inverted World Live. I'm your host, Shane Cashman. I am joined today by Wesley, who's filling in for Alex. We miss Alex, but we're very glad Wesley's here. Say what's up.
What's up? Happy to be here.
So before we get to our guests, I just want to say, obviously this, maybe you don't know it yet, but you do now. This is a pre-recorded episode. Had a few things last minute come up, but I want to make sure you guys had a video for this Sunday. One of those things is that I have a very pregnant wife with a very bad sprained ankle and 2 wild children. So had to rearrange some things. And then next week is the holiday weekend, so we'll do a pre-record for that as well. But you will have an episode on that weekend for Independence Day weekend. And I think that's about everything. Our guest today has been investigating some of the darkest parts of our society for the past few years. I've been following her stuff. It is kind of hard to read about and listen to, but I think it's really important, especially if you're a parent and you want to know the kind of world that your children are going to inherit. Obviously, the world has always been dark and it will continue to be dark, but there's a lot of things happening today in terms of the way the internet bleeds into reality and back and forth that I find terrifying and good to know about. So without further ado, I would like to bring on our guest today, BX. What's up?
Hey, Shane.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. Please introduce yourself, what you do, and we'll get into some stories.
Yeah, so I kind of joke around that I'm this soccer mom, basically just a normal everyday mom who kind of fell down some rabbit holes online and then basically just changed my entire life, my perspective on reality and everything else. So now I'm here. I'm doing a lot of online investigations into some really dark fringe online phenomena. Really interesting stuff, but like you said, it can get really, really dark. So sometimes I have a hard time with visibility, with people actually even like seeing my posts.
Because you think it's suppressed because of the certain types of words you have to use?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why do you think they're doing that? Why do you think the platforms are doing that? Because they want to protect people and keep them innocent, or is there something more nefarious happening in your mind?
I don't know if it's something more nefarious as much as it is that there are certain keywords that we're always going to trigger, shadow bans, like child exploitation,
right,
for example, right? That's a word that if you use it, the algorithm's going to just kind of naturally pick that up and suppress it by nature of.
Yeah.
Just
it's ridiculous because it shouldn't. I mean, I get it because you want to also suppress the actual stuff, but I think it's really important. But they're not, right? if you're on any of these platforms, you've seen it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of those rabbit holes that brought you to some of the things we'll talk about today was the Highland Park shooting with Robert Crimo. And did I say the name right?
Yes.
Sweet. And so this is a terrible mass shooting, July 4th, a few years ago. And what made you look into that to want to investigate in the first place?
Well, so I had started to just look into mass shootings in general. I thought that it was very strange, the kind of I guess the narratives that we were being given were just that this crazy kid, he's a white supremacist and he shot all these people because he's a white supremacist. And I just started thinking to myself, like, there seems to be a common variable in all of these that no one's talking about. And that common variable is that all of these people, most of them were online, right, in these weird fringe chat rooms. And I think that my interest in this started with the Buffalo Tops shooting. It was a grocery store shooting that was live streamed on Twitch.
Right.
So we kind of found this guy's Discord logs, and he was talking about the guy who was basically indoctrinating him and giving him advice about what kind of guns and gear to buy and how to carry out the attack. Like somebody was verbatim grooming him to do it. And when you looked into who he was, Peyton Gendron was his name, you could see that he was just a really isolated hypochondriac. COVID had hit him really hard. He had isolated himself, and his parents are just, and everyone around him, like nobody would have suspected it. And you hear that over and over and over. Right. It's not like occasionally you have the shooters who had like red flags a mile away,
Hmm.
but some of them were a little bit less, more innocuous, and so I was interested in kind of looking into those cases specifically and seeing
And
if I could figure out what was going on.
with Cremo, what made you think to even go online and look into where he was? Was there something in a report that you read or something else?
So at the time, I had already kind of looked into a couple of mass shootings, and one thing that I found out was that if you're not at the ground floor getting their information offline,
Mm.
it's gone
Yeah.
because they scrub it, right? And so if you want that information, what I found was that there's a whole lot of people like that who just immediately seize on the opportunity to try to archive everything that comes out around,
Hmm.
a mass shooting event so that they can archive it. So you can go back to it later and say, that's not what happened, you
Right.
know? In most cases, there might not be a whole lot, but in Robert Cremo's case, there was an insanely large online footprint to dig through. You might remember him because he was this Awake the Rapper, and he had these really cringe music, like
Right.
rap videos.
He's got like the
And
tattoos on his neck, like a leaf or something. Yeah.
yeah. Awake was his rapper name, right?
Interesting.
And so yeah, so that gave us so much to go off of. Well, it ended up that Robert Cremo had created an alternate reality game, an ARG, which we call it, right? Something kind of like Cicada or some of these other more sophisticated ARGs. And at the time, and he had a manifesto, which I have here actually.
Really?
It's
I didn't know that
a
about
book
him.
full of numbers. Yeah, it's
Wow.
just a book full of numbers. 33 pages, I think, of numbers. And we thought at the time that that manifesto would be important, like that be his like mass shooting manifesto. But I think that over time we learned that all of those music videos that the media kind of made it seem like they were like ominous and, immediately preceded the shooting were actually done like years before. And he actually had a pretty good online following of fans. And he had created this ARG for his music. So,
Wow. He had like a
anyways,
whole lore. It's interesting how
yeah.
these people
Yeah.
sometimes are connected to like music, because obviously I think of Charles Manson. Not that they're similar, but in certain ways. Did I say Charles or Marilyn Manson? I forget. I meant to say Charles Manson.
Which one? Yeah, you said Charles Manson.
And then there was that guy who severed his father's head and called for other people to
Yeah,
kill
yeah,
feds, and he was a musician as well. And his
Yeah.
music was, but his music was really hard to listen to. I didn't want to listen to it because it felt like it was a MK Ultra triggering mechanism. But this kid had like a good following, and really was trying
yeah,
to
it
be
was like niche,
for
lo-fi kind of stuff. Yeah. But the thing is like what you said about, well, they have like a lot of robust lore behind them. But what really is the case is that I know this is hard for people to accept, okay? But they're human beings with lives and families and childhoods and, robust experiences. And while some of them are like just, evil little shits, you start looking into them and you're like, man, this kid is evil, right? I didn't get that feeling from Robert Cremo. And I started to, network with some of his friends and family members and kind of try to unravel the mystery of like what happened to him. How did he get there? Right.
What did you think? Like, are you suspicious at all of anything that we've been told about that story?
Yeah, everything that you've been told about that story, like any media outlet, all of them were completely wrong, is what I found. I found that the media reports were almost unequivocally incorrect. Like they took some little breadcrumb that had been somewhere that meant something that didn't mean anything, but they
Right.
blew it up to be like, he was a Trump supporter or whatever,
Of
right? So you
course.
heard all these narratives that were false. Tucker Carlson went on and basically just said he was on SSRIs and that's what caused this, but he wasn't on SSRIs.
Really?
Why were they lying? Why are they lying to us about it? It doesn't make any sense. Both sides are just completely just throwing out false narratives constantly.
Do you think because that helps back up the narrative they want people to think? Whether a lot of us,
I think that's what it is.
I tend to bring up the SSRIs a lot because a lot of them are, or at least we've been told, have been on SSRIs.
But you've been told wrong.
Yeah, right. That's why you have to
They've
kind of
been
peel
lying
back
to
all
you
these
about
things.
it.
Yep. And then, so
And-
why do you
and
think
why?
that? Why do you have a reason why you think that's the case?
I don't know. It's very strange because like when I started doing mass shooting research, I started actually compiling a database of these kinds of things, just to see like how many of them came from single parent homes. You hear that a lot too, right? When in fact, most of them came from homes with married parents. But if you tell that to people online, they don't reverse their stance and go, huh, maybe bad parents and bad marriages cause mass shootings. They'll try to do these mental gymnastics to, no, you're wrong for whatever reason. And it's the same thing with SSRIs. By and large, what we're seeing is that these shooters have had like red flags of mental illness, but weren't on medication. And so like I know everybody wants to conspiracize about big pharma and stuff, but when you just look at the data, the conclusion becomes, oh, maybe they should have fucking been on medication because they were hearing voices telling them to murder people.
Right. It's almost like, I mean, because a lot of these people, I'm thinking about the mass shooter in Maine just this past fall. I don't know if he was on anything, but the conversation was interesting. But was he in a mental institution? Like, was that part of this story officially?
Over a year prior to the shooting.
And hearing voices or no?
Yeah. And the mess up thing about that is that people try to blame everything except the police. Okay. Like, because the family of that guy in Maine, they had been like basically pleading with the police to do something about him. The police were like, we can't do anything. Sorry, he's dangerous. We don't really want to, we don't put ourselves in a dangerous situation. Just leave him alone. And, they had many reports from his family members that were like, he's talking about going and shooting places up. Like he's going to kill people. And the police just failed to do anything about it. And he wouldn't take medication because he was in denial that he had anything wrong.
Wow.
And so when I started hearing people blame SSRIs again, I'm like, you guys are just straight up not looking at like the facts. That's not what happened, but it's really easy to mislead people when it comes to these narratives. So the same way that the left misleads people about gun violence and gun control, they use a lot of faulty reasoning and bad statistics to do that. The right also does the same thing when it comes to like hot button political issues.
It's almost like thinking about SSRIs as the one ultimate boogeyman behind a lot of these mass shootings. It almost waters down the true nature of evil operating behind it.
It does.
The police response is obviously a problem because you do hear a lot of these people have had, people say, hey, maybe you should watch out. And then they've been avoided. I mean, that's been turned into a meme where he was on our list or whatever the feds would say or the cops would say afterwards.
Yeah. He was known to the FBI, right? Yeah. Say the word.
With Cremo, so you find his digital footprint and you're going down this rabbit hole. And then how do you find the website? Like would you say it's a blog of these incel types or something else?
Yeah. So yes, the Incel forum is kind of the next step on my journey, I guess, where basically I was doing a lot of research into mass shootings, and there had been a couple of people who had tried to insinuate that Robert Crimo was an incel, which is like if you don't know what that is, like a pop culture word, I guess, sort of, that means involuntarily celibate. And the definition is like guys who can't get laid despite trying. Okay. They're trying to find a girlfriend and get laid, but they can't. When somebody had kind of described Robert Crimo as that, I didn't agree. He had girlfriends. This kid was actually pretty popular. He had friends. Like he wasn't a loner, weird, like the media made it seem. And so when I reached out to one of those people, it turned out that person, I didn't know at the time because, she had a podcast about incels and where she kind of whitewashed, and tried to soften them and make them look like the community wasn't a risk, a threat, But in reality, I found out that she was actually a threat assessor of some sort for, these DHS funded programs that work in countering violent extremism.
Is this Nama?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and how did you find her through the websites? Like was she on the blogs or?
Well, I found her because she had made an article about Robert Crimo, and I just reached out to her about it. And that's when we started talking about incels, and she told me about her podcast. And that's when I started going, oh, okay. So her podcast is about this particular forum. But when I go into the forum, what I found was that, no, there's a serious terrorist risk here. Like, this is alarming. Like, we're not talking about, stochastic terrorism on like 4chan.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was to me, it was an obvious honeypot where kids were being lured in there and then groomed by real terrorists. This is exactly what I had been looking for, right? Because I had been looking for the people above the mass shooters, the people who were indoctrinating them into these ideologies.
Right.
And that's what I found there.
Right. Like what's going on with the Buffalo thing.
Right.
And when you're in that website looking around, are you thinking at any time like some of these kids are just trolling, like they just came here to say some ridiculous stuff? Like how are you differentiating between what you think is a serious threat and then people just trolling?
I guess it comes with experience because at first when you go into a place like that, and since then I found multiple places like this. This isn't an isolated incident. This is just the incel one.
Right.
There's other ones. But you know, what I found over time is that like when the first time you go in there, most normal, healthy, well-adjusted people are going to be shocked and just be like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. No mentally well-adjusted person would go there and like be a member. It's very, very violent, very all about, you know, it's society's fault that you can't get laid. It's women's fault you can't get laid, and you should go rape women and murder women and become pedophiles. I mean, it's just atrocious.
Right.
And I think that most people, and I pick at people who call themselves free speech absolutists. So sometimes, right, because that word gets thrown around. But in reality, the people who operate these forums, no, they are free speech absolutists. They do think that you should be able to groom kids and promote pedophilia and do all kinds of disgusting things, which I can't agree with. So most people, it's kind of funny to show people these sites and have them go, you know, you weren't being a hysterical Karen after all. Like, this is terrible.
And have some of these violent like fantasies, I know they have, but can you describe for us how some of these violent fantasies have bled out into the real world from a website like that?
Yeah. So like I was going to say, you know, you were talking about how do you know the difference? Well, at first you don't, because you're just shocked at what you're seeing. But over time, you start to understand the lingo, and you start to understand when people are just shit posting versus like, you know, I'll give you a really good example of like, there was a report made not too long ago by an ISIS watching website or Al Qaeda website that watches this stuff. And they had found that there were like 5,000 site visits to the main ISIS recruiting page from that incel forum in like a year or two span, I think. And so, that's not surprising, because there's actual members of ISIS on there, and they're actually trying to, you know, convert incels into radical jihadists.
Right.
And so, you know, it makes sense that counterterrorism agencies would be in there because it's a serious national security threat. But you can start to tell the difference between somebody who's just like blurting out a bunch of violent stuff versus ISIS. Like, they'd speak differently. You can just tell the difference with experience, right?
And the words they're using are the sentence structure, stuff like that too. Like I've been on some websites, not as bad as that, but certain ones for guys who were violent against like prostitutes in Long Island when I was looking into the serial killer out there. And it's just, you know, it's not dark web. It's just very easy to go to. Just no one knows to go there other than these local guys. And it's just, they get away with saying crazy things that they say they're doing in real life, you know?
Right.
And it's just
yeah.
weird.
And that's a difference, right? Like, so you also learn the difference between what's actionable for law enforcement and what's First Amendment protected. And most people are surprised. Most people, if somebody's screaming about murdering women, they think that person needs to be like visited by the FBI, but they have to actually be pretty specific. Like, they have to be like, I'm going to murder a woman, and I'm going to do it like this. And this is who I'm going to target. It has to be more like an actionable plan. They have to know that person. They have to have a reason to believe that person's going to mobilize to do it.
Not just an abstract thing.
Yeah. So a lot of people have this misconception that the feds will just like just run around and like tackle these problems. They really don't. It's hard. It's hard to bring a case against somebody who hasn't actually committed a crime because of the First Amendment.
When you're looking at, are you able to see Cremo's posts on that blog?
So Cremo didn't have any posts on the Incel blog. It turned out that he was completely unrelated to the Incel movement whatsoever.
Okay. So you were hearing them say he was Incel adjacent or an Incel, went there, and you couldn't find any footprint of his on any website like that.
No.
What did that say to you?
That he wasn't an incel, you know, look somewhere else. And that's what I ended up, finding him more like on these gore websites. He was on a really strange gore website. And I'm not going to give the name of it on your podcast because I don't want people going there, but it's it's just like best gore, live leaks kind of,
Right.
but there's more of a community aspect to it where the people in there are actually becoming friends and they know each other really well. It's kind of strange. Almost, it was somebody on some media post about it had called it a cult, which I don't like to overuse that word because I do research cults and I see them all the time.
Right.
This is more like a strange fringe online subculture where people become a little bit over socialized.
Right.
And what you find on this particular website is that you would expect most of the incels and most of these weirdos to be like the weirdo. When I say weirdos, I mean like the people on these really extreme forums, right? You'd expect them to be like just like fringe kids who are like locked in their mom, like, in their basements, I guess, typing away on the keyboard. But actually in this gore forum, it was more like everyday professionals that you would just see walking around in your day-to-day life. Like your neighbor could be on this gore website having these like weird gore fantasies. And it was strange to see.
So
that.
When you say gore website, are they watching like beheadings? Or are they talking about gore or all that?
They share it like just like live leaks, only there's like a discussion forum.
Okay.
Part,
Okay. Interesting. Right.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like Faces of Death, I guess.
Yeah, that's what
when I
it
was
is.
a kid, there was
Everything from like
VHSs.
accidents to ISIS beheadings. They also have that's something
Wow.
there too.
And so when you're in these websites, what was it that you came across when you started realizing there was a much darker thing, a strain happening with perhaps these death cults I mentioned at the beginning of the show?
Well, so right when I had started to contact Nama Cates about like, just because it wasn't just the incel stuff, I was interested in her research about accelerationism, which is something that I had a word I had heard kind of during my research. And it was something that resonated with me because with the things that I were seeing, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. It's more than just like, ISIS, for example, or it's more than just like a crazy person who wants to kill a bunch of people. These are actually people it's a decentralized network of terrorists who are actually working towards collapsing the United States or the West in general, like Western countries, right? They want the West to fall. And so part of the way that they do that is by inciting political division. And part of the way they do that is by convincing somebody to commit a racially charged or otherwise politically motivated mass shooting, and then watching everybody fight over it. And so the theory was that some of these mass shootings had been engineered almost to create that kind of discourse, that kind of political divide. Oh, he was a Trumper. Oh, it was a transgender person, right? All of these things that make us angry and get us to fight is exactly what these people are looking for. And this is only one little arm of what accelerationists do. They've also been responsible for attacks against infrastructure. You've heard about people like going and shooting a power grid, right? Shooting a power substation and people losing power. That's an accelerationist strategy. They promote that all over their telegrams. They promote derailing trains. They promote anything that they feel like would cause a strain on the U.S. infrastructure, or a division between people to get them to fight and hopefully weaken our country enough that it will eventually collapse in on itself.
Am I wrong in thinking that mass shooter in New Zealand was an accelerationist a few years back?
He absolutely was. And actually the Christchurch shooting, which is the one you're referring to, was kind of a pivotal moment where it actually inspired something called the Christchurch model of virality because of how viral it went, right? Him live streaming it, putting the video up there, and all of the aesthetics he used on his gun. And that was like the first aesthetic shooter. We call them aesthetic shooters, right?
Right.
You see them they got an AR-15, they're live streaming it. They have stuff written all over their guns. They're all decked out in tactical gear. They have little manifestos. So that became something that people copycatted because it was so effective, very effective at creating this narrative, that they're looking for.
His manifesto referenced people from both sides of the political spectrum, I believe. So there was one side saying, see, he mentioned so-and-so, and then the other side saying, well, they mentioned that person too, which meant, it's just chaos.
Right. And there was a recent one. I'm trying to think of which one it was. It might have been El Paso, the El Paso Walmart shooting. He had his own manifesto that pretty much like copycatted the Christchurch manifesto. And Gendron also had one that did this. And in the manifesto, it says, haha, watch everybody fight over this. I'm going to make the right and the left fight, and it's going to be great. I'm going to cause America to collapse by making all of you think that I did it because of this. And it's all right there.
Yeah.
But they don't, but one thing that came out with the Tranifesto, okay, like the whatever, the Nashville shooter, right? Is that you had this big false narrative where people were saying they're not releasing the manifesto because the shooter is trans. They don't ever release the manifestos, ever. The only reason that we even saw some of these other manifestos is because these guys intentionally, deliberately put them on 8chan or whatever, right? Because they wanted people to find it.
Right.
And once it's out there, you can't control it.
Right.
But the news won't report on it. We still don't hear all the details. You can't just go search for the manifesto and find it without having to go on like, one of these really kind of suspicious sites to get it.
Do these people think of themselves as accelerationists, do you think? Or is there someone behind them, like you were saying with the Buffalo shooter, that he was kind of like groomed into this violence? So are they actually saying like, hey, I'm an accelerationist, I have this goal to collapse this country, or are they like a pawn?
Some of them do. I think it's both, a mixed bag. We see ones where it was clear that they were acting in some sort of accelerationist way. But the thing about the true accelerationists is that they're politically agnostic. Yeah. So it's not like, so the Great Replacement or something like that would just be a mechanism they would use to groom a kid who was already on 4chan talking about, something anti-Semitic or like anti-immigration, right? And they would kind of use that as a vulnerability to groom and indoctrinate that person. But that doesn't mean that the accelerationists are anti-immigration. They're just using these extremist talking points, and it's very individualized, right? So they might find somebody on like a white supremacy forum, and they might use that for, a shooting. And
so they're preying upon they're like doing like a psychological profile on some of these people to some degree, to be like, obviously I don't, like, I'm speaking as the accelerationist behind the scenes. I don't believe in all this, but I know what to say to this person to kind of puppeteer them.
Yes.
And draw them into
they're not really an
violence.
incel, but they're going to pretend they're an incel and use this charged language and use the lingo, and they'll infiltrate a community and pretend to be one of them to try to find people to groom. And I think that in today's day and age, they're even using AI chatbots a lot to find these kids online and to kind of profile who the best target is. Yeah.
So these people, the prey would be talking to a chat bot, not even realizing that they're talking to a bot.
Yeah, they wouldn't realize it. Yeah.
Kind of like porn girlfriends or AI porn girlfriends that they can get now. And now they have AI ISIS or accelerationist terrorists helping them out. What are the government, what's the feds doing about this? Are they on there too, pretending to be people to take out the terrorists, or are they letting it happen?
I don't think that they're letting it happen, but however, we have seen evidence, plenty of evidence that the feds do kind of employ like sting operations where they will find somebody, right? Maybe they're using AI to find a target. And then in my opinion, sometimes some of the cases have seemed pretty unethical. It seems to me almost like they're grooming the people themselves, right? And the expectation is that they'll get a good enough case against them, and then they'll move in and arrest them and save the day. Pat on the back. You stopped this 16-year-old kid who was somehow indoctrinated into ISIS in Las Vegas. Nobody's asking, like, how did this kid get indoctrinated into ISIS? But then when you read the criminal complaint, you start to realize that, oh, they were talking to a Fed, right? I don't agree with that. I think it's very unethical.
That's how the Whitmer.
I was just going to say,
right?
That's the Fed napping.
That should have been a huge wake-up call for everybody.
Right. I have a question. How far back do things like this, these kind of seeking people out, go? Is it something that predates the internet?
Gladio.
Yeah,
What-
you said
Maybe.
the magic word.
Is that
Well,
you think it's even before that though?
I would even go so far as to say that like a potential title for my future book would be American Gladio. Yeah, I
Ooh,
think it's very
great
relevant.
title.
However, I don't, yeah, don't TM, don't steal it. Actually, I don't have it trademarked, but don't steal it.
Not yet.
You know, yeah, I don't know how far back it goes, but the internet certainly made it easier,
Right. This
right?
all reminds me, like haven't heard this kind of discussion on these things in a long time, but it reminds me of the Gabby Giffords
The shooting.
shooter,
I don't know about the shooting.
Jared Loeffner,
Yeah,
and
I don't know about it.
they
accelerationist.
is that who same thing? I just remember that
Really?
they dug on this guy and started discovering things about him, and it all became very confusing as to what he was trying to. There was a big fight about like it was because of this, it was because of this, because of Sarah Palin. It was all these different reasons, but the more you dug into who this person was, it just became more murky and confusing and what he was trying to accomplish.
That's a really big sign that maybe somebody's been in their ear confusing them.
Yeah.
Right. Because they really do know how to, it's not like just some crude random person telling, hey, you should go commit a shooting, right? This is like very advanced type of behavioral control, right? Like they're using brainwashing tactics. You would even call it like MK Ultra type of tactics, right? They're very good at targeting certain vulnerable personality traits and individualizing a radicalization plan for that individual. So the people who are doing this, in my opinion, these aren't amateurs. These people they do this. This is what they do, right? And we still don't really know necessarily who is, if anyone is behind this movement, or if it's more of just like I said, a decentralized network of interested parties. So that might include domestic terrorists within the US, people who want to have a civil war in the hopes they can install some kind of fascist regime in the ashes. Or it could be a foreign government, or one of our foreign enemies are out there
All
also
of
doing this
them.
kind of stuff. All of
All
them,
of them at the
because
same
this
time.
is because once you find an effective strategy, once one person finds an effective strategy, you
Yeah.
know that all of our enemies are using it. So
Isn't this
yeah,
kind of like Helter Skelter? Like starting a race war?
in what way?
Well, like Bugliosi's theory was that,
Yeah.
whether you want to believe it or not, which I don't, but the
I don't-
story
yeah.
was that Manson wanted to create a race war, hide in a bunker, and then emerge with his like super race. I don't believe that's the real story, but that's the official story.
Yeah, so I believe, and I love that you had Tom O'Neill on here, because his book was just like super enlightening
So
for me.
good.
I've kind of come to the same conclusion, but basically, and I believe that the U.S. government has used the racial divide to control us for a very long time.
100%.
And I think that I think the majority of the race war, or the race, racial tension as we know it today, was engineered by the government. You can see evidence of this dating all the way back, to the civil rights era.
LBJ.
And you can see it going back forever, right? Into just as long as there has been an argument over civil rights, there's been division here. And I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but
I know. And then is also thinking about how long this goes back with Wesley's question. I also wonder what difference there really is between some of those anarchist assassins, because they almost, it's kind of sounds similar to me. In terms of, we're just going to do violence to collapse what's going on currently. I don't know if those anarchists, had any real goal in mind, because it sounds like the accelerationists do, which is to destroy everything and maybe install fascism.
They do, but they don't, because when you push, then I've talked to many accelerationists. Like I've talked to some of these people that you would consider terrorists. Like they've been kind enough to talk to me,
Right.
and when you push them on stuff, they really, they're kind of confused, because, and of course, these are lower level guys. I'm not talking to people who probably actually do have a plan, like perhaps like one of our foreign enemies. They probably have a plan. But the people who are on the ground actually promoting this stuff, when you ask them, like, okay, well, so like collapse, right? And then what? Oh, fascist regime. I'm like, but what about the other fascists who want to install their version of fascism. Is it going to be like a Mad Max Thunderdome with all of the various accelerationists fighting for whose fascist regime takes over? Like,
Right.
how are you going to take over? Like, how are you planning to actually do this? Like, what comes next? They can't answer it, right? And so that kind of leads me to believe that there is no answer. The answer is just simply to collapse the West. They want the West to fall. And a lot of them, especially some of the ones in Eastern Europe, which is a big hotbed for neo-Nazis, a lot of them believe that by destabilizing the West, and specifically the US, that they'll be able to kind of like capitalize off of that and install white ethno-states in their country. So it's really complicated, but I think that ultimately the goal is just to collapse the West. I think that's really the goal.
It's funny to think about what an accelerationist does once they collapse. Or like, because like, you can't, it's like almost like you can't turn off the accelerationism. Once it's on, you're going to keep destroying even through the wasteland. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. You brought up
some people have an idea, like Ted Kaczynski was an could have been considered an eco-accelerationist. And a lot of these guys, these newer versions of Ted Kaczynski, who called himself eco-fascist, which is actually technically what Peyton Gendron, the Tops Buffalo shooter, was.
Interesting.
And so a lot of those guys can be basically radicalized into thinking that a collapse will allow them to a collapse of industrial society, and will return to more of like a primitive culture. It's a concept called anarcho-primitivism.
The Buffalo shooter was like that, more eco, like an eco terror, almost like Weather Underground type.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is weird because wasn't one of the victims a guy who made that water powered? Is that true?
Yes,
the water powered
that
car.
Is true.
Wasn't
really
that would be
weird.
someone he would have wanted to work with? I did not know. I did not realize that.
Yeah, the water powered car engine conspiracy theory. It's a good one.
Right. So you brought up neo-Nazis. I thought that would be a fine segue into Order of the Nine Angles. Is that how they go? Is that what they go by? Where does that fall into what we're talking about? And how did you find out about that? Would you say it's a cult?
Yes and no. It's a cult, but the cult was designed with accelerationism in mind. So it was a front for accelerationism. I'll explain.
Yeah, please.
The way I found it was that I had been talking to this person, Nama Cates, and I'd been researching the Highland Park mass shooting. And we had kind of already seen mentions of this accelerationist group called Order of Nine Angles. They're a satanic neo-Nazi cult organization that is basically their MO is to infiltrate various communities in what they call insight roles, where they'll have a specific member or adherent to the 098 ideology infiltrate a group and really just ingratiate themselves and then become, one of them, and then try to rise in power so that they can even kind of control some of these groups. So that's the MO. And when I was studying the Highland Park shooting, we'd kind of seen some evidence that they might have been behind it. But ultimately I got a warning from an unknown person, anonymous person, basically sent me a warning saying like, hey, this shooting that you're researching is linked to Order of Nine Angles. You better be careful. And I think that what they said was, you better be careful unless you want your extended family members getting calls and threats on their lives for the next several years at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Can you talk about what evidence it was that you saw that made you think that?
Yeah, there was a couple of things. This is like really deep, this is like really kind of going into the weeds, I guess. But his manifesto, the name of his manifesto is Arcturus. And Arcturus is one of the septenary star systems in 098, which is a cult. And the premise of the cult is that the universe goes through eonic changes, right? And the idea is that in our traditional Western eon, it's their goal is to overthrow that and basically usher in a new dark age of evil, sinister chaos. So they believe that by doing this, they can. They also basically believe that Aryans are like this supreme galactic race that are destined to, I guess, I know best way to put this. They believe in a galactic imperium where Aryans will basically travel to other planets and become like a super race.
It's kind of like what
it's a cult.
Himmler, I mean, this is what Himmler was into
Yeah.
with Hitler, right? Not Hitler so much, but
There's a lot of
Himmler.
esoteric Hitlerism
Yeah.
involved. Yeah, a lot of Blavatsky. Yeah, for
So,
sure. It's an amalgamation of all of
because
that.
it sounds like they're kind of taking from that old lore that Himmler was into with, communing with the dead and the occult symbolism stuff,
Yeah.
buying that castle and bringing
Yeah.
that shaman in or whatever they call themselves to try to find a way to connect Aryans to other past histories and gods, like even
Right.
like I think Buddha or something.
Hyperborea type
Well,
of stuff.
Nephilim.
Nephilim.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, yeah, that is what they were
Yeah.
thinking about.
So yeah, that's similar, but there's also a lot of just kind of silly, like they've created their own demons, their own sigils, their own chants to invoke these demons and open stargates. And so there's 7 stars basically in their system, and one of those was Arcturus. So that, and that also the fact that we were looking into accelerationism as being a driver for mass shootings already, and we knew that this was like a group that was responsible for doing that. And there was a couple of others. I don't want to get too far in the weeds because again, I still don't really think that they had anything to do with it, but that's what got my attention turned on to it. And that's where I started researching
listening who might be skeptical of this being a possible widespread problem with O9A or others. Like, what can you point to show people like, hey, this isn't just some freak thing here and here or pockets of, like, there's perhaps a more bigger network, whether it's coalesced or not. It seems to be like there's a lot of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's up for debate how many members there are because it is a very secret community, and you might not even call them members necessarily because everything's very individualized. So it's more of like any individual can pick up their literature and follow the steps to become an adherent kind of superhuman type of person, right? And they move up through the ranks, but it's all individualized. So it kind of, there's not like a big group of people with hoods and robes like chanting in churches and stuff. And I would also kind of say, like, I guess a couple years ago when I started talking about this, a lot of people did kind of think that I was crazy. But as time has gone on, more and more mainstream news has picked up on it. And now it's just a fact. It's a fact. There's a Wikipedia page on it. You can go to all of the sources on that and find tons of articles that have been made in the mainstream about this group. So it is real.
Wasn't there a guy in the army who was part of this O9A?
Ethan Melzer, yeah. There's an
deal?
Interesting situation. He I had this whole conspiracy behind this guy at first because when this news first broke, we were following it really closely. And then right after he got charged and sentenced, we went to Google and I tried to type in Ethan Melzer because I was looking for an article, and I noticed that I couldn't find a picture of his face anymore because I was making a video and I couldn't find a picture of his face anymore. And I noticed that it was showing all these other people's faces instead. And it was almost like Google had said, hey, we need to remove this guy's face from the search results. So when you clicked on one of the pictures, what you found was that it was actually a related article that was in the article itself, right? You know how like if you go to an article, you scroll down, it'd be like related articles. Yeah. Well, they had like pulled thumbnails and like replaced them. And so there were all these people popping up when you posted his name or put his name in, but you couldn't find his picture anywhere. So they like really did kind of go on a scrubbing spree and tried to take his picture offline, which is weird.
What was he trying to do?
He was working with a group called Rape Waffen, which was a neo-Nazi, satanic neo-Nazi like cell, I guess, splinter cell. And what he was trying to do was organize an ambush on his army branch. So he was actually giving information to people who he thought were his comrades in O9A, who turned out to be informants. And he thought that he was giving information to people to give to ISIS or Al Qaeda to actually attack his troops. So he was planning an ambush.
That was in Europe? Was he
no,
on a
it
base?
Was here.
Oh, it was here.
Yeah.
And how did they? So once, like, how does that get to a point where they're like, okay, he's going to get delivered the bombs, like, or where? How does it end with him? Like who reports him, and what do we find out about the people involved behind the scenes? Like how many are there? How many are feds? Is it like the
It
Whitmer
was
thing?
really so we don't really know for sure because he took a plea deal, so never actually went to trial, which is a very common thing here. Like people be like, "Oh, he pleaded guilty. What a piece of shit," but they don't realize how strong armed these people can be to take a plea deal, right? And also, we don't see the trial evidence if we take a plea deal. We don't get to see it, so we didn't get to see a lot of that information. But I remember there was an article about how his lawyer had said in court that almost all of the people that he had talked to were Fed informants or LARPers, not even people who weren't even really part of. He basically said he was in like a Telegram group and none of the people were actually terrorists. It was just him and at least one informant. And then one of the kids who had been giving information to was pretending to be a Canadian paratrooper. But in reality, it was a 16-year-old kid who'd just gotten released from a mental hospital who was just pretending to be a Canadian paratrooper.
Wow.
There's just a lot of strange, like it was really weird. Like he wasn't actually plotting like he thought he was. Like and one of the people who was definitely pressuring him to give very specific information. And this is pretty obvious, right? Because you look at the chat logs and it'll be like, I'm thinking about, what if we committed a terror attack by doing this and that? And the person would be like, yeah, what kind of guns do you have? Oh,
great.
yeah. Well, when would you do this? Oh, well,
Right.
like, how would you do it? So they're like, you could see the informant trying to get him to say enough that they could actually move
Right.
in and press charges. However, in this case, I do think the guy was pretty serious. I think that he
Really?
was probably going to hurt some people. So whether or not you think that the means justify the ends or you agree with that stuff is kind of
It's very difficult because I don't agree with the
Yeah.
Fednapping, you know?
right.
They were
Yeah.
planning some crazy stuff, and a lot of that was written by feds. You know, what I've seen from the court documents that came out,
Mhm.
it was like a Northwoods type situation. And I think about that quite a bit. So we'll go back a bit because I want to hear more about Nama and what your relationship was with her and what you were saying you found out of. She was, what did you call her? Not she wasn't a federal agent, but
So I think that what she actually does is so she does work or did work for a DHS, Department of Homeland Security funded NGO. That NGO was a countering violent extremism NGO, which basically, if you followed, I have a Substack where I talk about this extensively, by the way.
where can they find
certain
that? Where can people find that?
it's BX Rights. That's my Substack
Cool.
handle. And yeah, I can give you it after
Yeah.
the stream too. But basically these grants kind of go to these groups. So so the government goes, hey man, there's a limit to how much we can actually just go into chat rooms and surveil people, right? There's a limit to what the government can do. So they use these NGOs to do it, and they call it preventing violent extremism or counterterrorism. And they train people like Nama to be threat assessors to see what a dangerous individual looks like so that they can escalate it to the police. But the problem I had with that, though, is that at the same time, she had her podcast. And her podcast was basically serving as an advertisement for the same forum. So rather than trying to keep people away from this ideology, it would seem like what she was doing was kind of softening the public's perception of it, kind of trying to whitewash it, while also, basically just providing an advertisement for that forum. So that's when I started to talk to her and be like, hey, I don't really agree anymore with some of the stuff you're saying because I've been into that forum and I've seen what's going on there. And I think the Fed should shut it down. Why is it still up? Like, this is a nightmare.
How
right?
does she whitewash that? Like, what would she do to make it sound not so bad?
Well, she would have the founders of the forum on her stream, first of all.
Okay.
And she was just talking to them like they were buddies, right? She would talk about incel mass shooters or incel killers. And she would kind of be like, well, it's not really their fault. And like, oh, well, they didn't have any connection to the forum. Obviously, the forum is perfect. It's angelic. No violence has ever been caused by the forum. And she said that many times. She's
Wow.
she's frequently lied and said that there's been no actual cases of violence connected to the forum, which I was able to pretty much immediately debunk that and show her several examples. So she was just lying about it, right? This is a terrorist forum, really is.
Right.
And she's making it seem like, she's defending it. She's defending it from people like me who come out and say, hold on, this is something we should look at. And so I called her out for that. And that's when she basically revealed to me that she was a threat assessor. And she told me that the forum was a honey trap and that I should just leave it be. And that I wasn't okay with that. Because I think that a lot of these mentally ill kids, they get drawn into that community. Maybe it's via Twitter, you know, like, I hate women, I'm going to watch some, you know, we joke around about it because DHS has targeted these, like, they've targeted like whatever podcasts, for example. They've
Really?
targeted Fresh and Fit. They've targeted Rollo Tomasi with government funds meant to suppress them.
Wow.
Right. And so I exposed that, and that's on my Substack, and they've all talked about it. Right. But the thing is that they're not actually going after the website or its owners. You know, in my opinion, they're drawing in these kind of mentally ill, largely autistic loner types who are already angry and sexually frustrated. I mean, is there anything more dangerous than a 20-year-old male who's angry at society because he can't get laid?
Right.
That's
Meanwhile,
a pretty dangerous state.
yeah, society is, there's porn everywhere. I mean,
Right.
even like on billboards to some degree, you know, and on TV.
Yeah, and it's making it worse. That
Yeah.
all kind of goes into their mental state, and they use that in that forum to be like, oh, you know, that's why women are all whores, and you know, this is why it doesn't matter if they live or die and their lives are worthless. There's a lot of like, you know, as far as a cult goes, that I do feel like it checks a lot of the boxes of a cult. There's a lot of otherness. Right. You come in here and it's incels versus everyone else.
Right.
If you ascend and get a girlfriend, I mean, people, you're basically blacklisted, and people, you know, hate you. They discourage these guys from actually overcoming.
Were they respectful to Nama, like on her show?
Some of them were, yeah, but also some of them were just obvious maniacs, like pedophiles. Really, like, you know, I've gotten really angry at her for having some of these people who just promote pedophilia as a solution to inceldom. It's very common.
Wow.
Oh, you can't get a girl your age? Well, guess what? A kid can't say no to you. That's the level of depravity that's going on there.
Disgusting.
Like, this is not something that I would consider free speech. This is like just something that's abhorrent and needs to be burned to ashes.
And it's,
so
I would say it's prevalent, you know, like seeing all these different people, like normal looking people in society who engage in the pedophilia stuff is, I mean, I did that. It's everywhere. I did that story in Ohio about these guys, and it was shocking, you know. And those guys were just like low, like some of them were low level. There was one firearms instructor and, you know, a fireman, but some of those guys were just like a manager at a Pizza Hut, but still unassuming, you know. And people think of evil as like the creatures in your nightmares, but unfortunately they look like humans, and they're, you know, I think they're possessed by demons, but. Well,
that's a good segue into the 764 stuff.
I guess. Perfect. Yeah, let's go.
You know, so aside from all of the mass shooting and stuff, we'd also been seeing signs of the O9A in a group that was revealed by the FBI in September of 2023 as being called 764, even though it's actually a group of splinter cells and various groups that are, you know, so to call it all 764, sometimes the criminals will get angry at you and be like, that's not technically correct. And you're like, nobody cares. Okay. We're just going to call it this for simplicity's sake. Nobody gives a shit. Okay. But basically, you know, it's a group of people who abuse and extort and sexually exploit children and young adults. They find them via Roblox and Minecraft and other online communities, and they target these kids, and they convince them to do all sorts of horrible things, from cutting their abusers' names into their bodies, sexually exploiting themselves, killing their pets on camera or like on live calls. It's like what they're trying to do is to just get people to do the worst things imaginable, and then have it on camera associated with your, you know, your name, your gang name, so that you can be like, I'm the most evil person.
They have to film the act, and they give it to the person. on the other side
Well,
of the
no.
screen?
So here's what will happen is like, let's say there's like a 15-year-old girl who's
Mhm.
kind of like in some of these Minecraft communities,
Mhm.
and they target her and they groom her into like sending some sexually explicit material. And then they use that to extort her and say, if you don't do more stuff for us, if you don't cut my name into your chest and take
Wow.
a video of it, if you
Wow.
don't kill your cat, I'm going to come kill your whole family.
Wow.
And they'll dox the kids. They'll find their real addresses. They'll torment their families. They'll do swatting attacks on them.
This has happened more
Um,
than a few times. Like
yeah,
there's instances of like multiple instances of this
it's
type
a
of thing.
network that's I think been estimated to have probably close to 200 people in it.
Wow. And is that
And
in America? Ever anywhere
all over
else?
the world,
All over the world.
all over the world. I would say that I've seen mostly American cases, but that's just
Mm.
because that's who we're,
Mhm.
but yeah, they're all over the world. And, so we had been kind of seeing this horrible content. Like when you see it, you know what it is because there's satanic imagery in it too, occult, very heavy occultist imagery.
Mhm.
So like you'll see like occultist symbols on the wall in blood next to like a dismembered cat or something, right? And it's just really the worst. It's the worst things you can't imagine worse stuff, right, than this.
Yeah.
And so we'd been noticing some of this really graphic content pop up in Discord channels, but we didn't really know what it was. It wasn't until the FBI came out and made a press release about this group back in September of 2023 that we started to really understand who it was and that it was connected to the Order of Nine Ankles.
How are they?
Um,
How are they connected?
so that's something that I've been researching lately, a lot because I guess some of the mainstream understanding isn't technically correct. But you know how we talked about how O9A, like they want to collapse society and they want to corrupt our youth and they want to just promote evil things and they
Mhm.
infiltrate groups to get people to do evil things. And even better if that group is already doing evil things and you can get in there and push them to start, using satanic imagery, or making it even a little bit more sinister, maybe something a little bit more evil, right? And so that's kind of what we've been seeing is that these people who were adherents to O9A had sort of ingrained into this group and started pushing more of a satanic aesthetic. And also more accelerationism. Now what we're seeing is that those people have realized that the pedophilia angle got way out of control. And now it's like, people are getting arrested left and right.
Hmm.
And so now they're trying to they come into my DMs all the time and they're like, stop saying we're pedophiles. We've moved away from that now. Now we're just terrorists who want to, commit terrorist acts. I'm like, why are you in my
They hit you up a
political
lot, it
messages?
seems like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've gotten a lot of really credible threats.
Yeah.
When I
It's
started
crazy.
covering this. And one of the people who was sending me all of those threats was arrested in the UK. It turned up to be an 18-year-old in the UK.
Wow. When did that happen?
A couple months back in April, I think, is when he was arrested. His name is Cameron Finnegan. He went by the moniker Acid. And he was a friend of Kyle Spitz, who we kind of talked about. Did we talk
Oh yeah,
about
no,
this?
but we should get to that right
Yeah.
after you tell more about this guy. Like, what did they find out
Yeah.
about him?
Well, so this guy was the one who was basically telling me, you have 30 minutes to take down all of your posts about me, or I'm going to have somebody go shoot up your house and rape and murder your daughter. So it was like pretty serious stuff that they were saying.
Wow.
So, obviously the feds were involved with that because I'm the victim of that. So
Yeah.
I'm actually one of the victims of 764 myself.
That's crazy.
But they ended up arresting him, and what they found was that he did have child exploitation content on his devices, which they all almost do. But also he had been planning to murder a person that he knew in real life. Like he'd been plotting a murder of some homeless man who he'd had beef with. So like he actually got charged with planning a terror attack because he was actually planning a murder.
Is it O9A or 764 that where you murder as part of like the initiation? Is that part of what you're talking about with the self-harm stuff?
764 doesn't really have an initiation. It's more of just a group of really, really misguided kids hurting other kids. And then sometimes the people who are hurt become perpetrators. And it's just a really ugly, corrupt cycle of abuse. The best explanation I've ever heard from anybody about why they were doing that was just straight up to corrupt the youth. We want to corrupt American youth. That's what we want to do. and promote them doing horrible, sinister things, right? So the O9A itself, they do sometimes discuss human sacrifice, and the idea of human sacrifice to them isn't like at an altar or like with a young virgin or something.
Mhm.
It's actually like they call them opfers, and what they do is they look for people who they think are of weak character or have some kind of other personality trait, and so then they convince themselves that it's a an acceptable offering because they're trying to, what they call culling.
Mhm.
They're trying to cull all of the weak people. They call them mundanes, right? Us normies, basically. They could justify killing any of us by way of like, well, they didn't believe in the sinister doctrine, therefore their personality, trait
It's
made
nothing
them an
to them.
acceptable offer. But they particularly go after bad people, people who've done bad things. And they also go after journalists and people who are reporting on them
Right.
because they've justified that in their minds as being like they're stopping the sinister activities, and so therefore they're willing
Right.
sacrifices.
Interesting. With you said opfers? Like what does that stand
Opfer.
what does that stand for? Do you know?
I don't know. So the person who made this cult, his name is David Myatt. He's like an 80-something-year-old man at this point, I'm pretty sure. And he's like literally still on Twitter. You can summon him by just talking about him, and he'll come up on one of his alts and start trying to like guide the narrative around himself. So you just imagine this like
Candyman?
old cult leader. Yeah, just like this old cult leader who has nothing better to do now than just like search his name on the Twitter search function to see who's talking about him. Like, it's
Wow.
kind of sad.
Whoa.
But anyways, this guy was an old Gladio operative. He was actually associated with is it column 88?
88.
Is that
I think that is
yeah.
one of those, yeah.
And so
Legit, before you go further, can you just describe Gladio? For those who didn't watch last week with Jose Galasan, we did talk about Gladio, but if you don't mind filling people in on what Gladio is.
Yeah, so Gladio was like a Cold War era program that would had groups of clandestine soldiers and forces like kind of covertly occupying certain areas, which I think originally was supposed to be just in case the war broke out again.
Yeah, like
But over time,
anti-communist.
it was anti-communist. And over time, what they learned though was that they could use what they called the strategy of tension, which was using these people to go do like, I mean, basically we're talking about accelerationists.
Yeah.
These are like OG accelerationists,
Yep.
right? Where they would go commit an attack or provoke something at a protest and just keep people afraid and needing the government to step in and keep, the security of the homeland, right? And so they use these fear tactics to kind of keep people afraid of communism and to keep them thinking that they needed the government, to have more power than it maybe
Yeah.
should have. And
Right.
there's a lot of evidence that this has never ended. In fact, that this is extended all the way to the US and is being used today against people in the exact same way we've been describing.
I would 100% guarantee that. I mean, we had PatCon, which is
Right.
sort of like that, and
which never ended.
Never ended. And Phoenix, I think, was in Vietnam, and the Nazis had their own. They had Operation Werewolf. Like they had their own like stay-at-home orders. We're going to destroy these people. I kind of want to venture out and to say that Werewolf maybe became Paperclip. But Paperclip on our end didn't know that Werewolf was part of Paperclip. For those listening, Paperclip was when we hired the Nazis at the end of World War II.
That, but yeah.
But yeah, it's something I've been thinking about lately, connecting all those dots. So okay, that's Gladio, and now we've got this sad 80-year-old man who you say. And how do you know that he was part of Gladio?
Yeah, well, so it's been reported on a few times. Like we know his history. Like he was a British neo-Nazi. He's been associated with a lot of the same people that you would expect. And I'm probably not the best person to talk about that. I've operated a lot on William Ramsey's book, Global Death Cult.
I want to read that.
He really did a good job about kind of laying that timeline out. But ultimately, the bottom line is that David Myatt was a National Socialist. He was a revolutionary National Socialist. He believed that we couldn't, that regular politics and protests and stuff weren't working, and that we needed to find a better way to ensure that National Socialism had a chance. And so his idea was to create a satanic cult and convince people that we needed to infiltrate specific communities and do all of these things. But in fact, he was targeting things that would help his National Socialist goal. So it was, in my opinion, really just a front, right? A way to form a cult around a political agenda that he cared about. So that's my opinion about, and I'm sure that this is a really vague, shadowy topic.
Right.
Like there's a lot of people who will come in and, I've even had, we were talking about this on William Ramsey's podcast actually, and had a bunch of Niners on Twitter arguing back and forth about, the lore around it. And then you have people like Myatt who go and try to like change history and try to like put out information that paints a different picture, and you can't trust him, obviously. So who do you trust?
Like the newer people of this cult, do they agree with him? Do they say he's the guy who started it? They don't.
Well, yeah, he started it.
Okay.
100%. But there's another guy who came into the picture later named Joshua Sutter, who's a little bit more of an intriguing character, because we actually found out in 2021 that he'd been an FBI informant for 20 years. Wow. While he infiltrated this cult. And the problem is that you might think, okay, well, like with the Melzer, maybe no big deal if he was using it to honey trap them, and it kind of like try to a lot of times that the FBI will put people like that into positions where they can wrangle control of the group and then steer it in a different direction, right? But the direction that Joshua Sutter steered O9A was towards a way more violent and even pedophilic kind of direction.
What the hell? As a Fed? Like,
well, he was, so it's a very long story. It's actually really funny. I'll send you an article about it later that was written by a guy named Nate Thayer. And it was actually, he exposed the link between these guys in North Korea, which is a long, crazy, weird story with a Shakespearean twist. Like his girlfriend tried to poison another white supremacy leader. It's just crazy. Okay. But basically Joshua Sutter had a history of trying to control white supremacy groups and forming his own cults too. He's formed like a Kali kind of Hare Krishna sect of his own right before this. And so, so the whole time he was an FBI informant. We found this out. Nate Thayer's article came out in like 2013, I think. Mm-hmm. And at the time he didn't know that, even though there'd been rumors of it. Now in 2021, we have court documents proving that he's been an FBI informant for all these years. And it really created quite a fuss, because people were like, how did the FBI let this guy publish terrorist literature? Because they were paying him. And they were paying him like $100,000 a year or something. Sheesh. And then he was operating this publishing group called Martinet Press and using that to publish all of this terrorist propaganda. Oh, so really the feds were indirectly funding this cult leader who was, steering the O9A into this really disgusting, depraved territory, as if it weren't bad enough.
My goodness. Do you have hope for the feds at all? Like, do you see any reason to have the feds?
Yes.
You do?
I do.
Please give me your reasoning why.
I would say that it's not like, I'd say before I started doing all of this, I might have thought that it was just the FBI. Right. And they all know and are all in on it. But in reality, it's like there's lots of different groups and divisions. And I think that the biggest corruption is up top at like the DOJ level, which is really where the focus needs to be, because I've met a lot of FBI agents who are like working in child trafficking, and not just in this, but in just other, obviously I have to report things to the feds all the time, because I see some of the worst stuff you can imagine, and I have victims and stuff.
And they communicate with you, and like you feel like they're actually doing anything?
Well, I'm not like in communication with them, but I've seen them making arrests.
So that part's good. And they're arresting evil people who are hurting children, which is like, I'm all for that.
And I've talked to them and I've talked to people who, when you talk to some of these guys, you can tell like they want to see these guys go to jail and they hate them as much as you do. Yeah. Right. Everybody wants these nasty, nasty child abusers to go to jail. But I think that's also the child trafficking side that I've worked, human trafficking and child exploitation side that I've worked with is probably a lot different from like the DC Domestic Terrorist Task Force or whatever.
I just worry that the cons outweigh the pros with these agencies. Like, obviously, I want some help with taking these people off the streets and hurting. But you're talking about $100,000 a year, perhaps, going to certain these people. And we see what the CIA's done. You've read Chaos. You read Poisoner in Chief. They do a lot of bad stuff. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is on us.
let me add some nuance to the whole confidential informant thing, right? Because like Joshua Sutter, for example, being paid all this money, I think that the problem, I don't think that the FBI was like, here's some money, go publish terror literature. I think that's a misunderstanding of how these programs work, because I think how it works is like, they can pay somebody to be an informant and they'll pay criminals to do it, right? Because they're just looking for information.
Yeah.
And so I think that what they might do is turn a blind eye to some of the things that guys are doing because they're giving them good information, right? And so there's this like incentive for them to ignore some of the crimes that are being committed so they can continue to get information that will help them make arrests. But again, in this case, this is a very clear example of like the pros did not outweigh the cons, right? The means didn't justify the ends. You created a monster. Now we've got this 764 cult that's out there abusing kids.
Right.
And all of that stemming from this guy that you paid, 15 years ago to give you information on Atomwaffen division is what it was. And he actually, Joshua Sutter, he was the informant who collapsed the Atomwaffen division and resulted in a lot of arrests in the neo-Nazi communities, right? So they did get something out of it. But the thing is, what were they, like what blind eye were they turning to what he was doing? And were they looking 10 years ahead into what the future consequences of that might be? Personally, I'm of the opinion that we should transfer the funding from the FBI's, some of these other domestic terrorism branches where they're doing these really complex operations and put them towards child exploitation. Because I think that once you start looking at it from a child exploitation point of view, you find that a lot of it overlaps, right? And I think that there's a lot of good people in the Bureau who really do want to make it a change and make a difference, but they're not funded enough. They're too busy funding investigations into grandmas who were in the Capitol on January 6th.
That's the thing. That's the other thing. It's like they're being weaponized against normal people for the most part, not actual satanic people. And when I say satanic, I'm curious what you think. When you talk about these satanic cults, do you think they actually are satanic, or are they doing it because it just the aesthetic of it? What's the nature?
I get shit no matter what. If I call them Satanists, I had the I had the Church of Satan official Twitter page, like in a quote tweet battle with me one time.
Well
I was
done.
like, where in my life am I that this Church of Satan? And I'm just memeing at them because I'm like, what do I do here?
What do they say? Why?
So it became an issue when I first reported on the Kyle Spitz stuff.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about him too when you're done with this.
Yeah. So, I talked about 764 as satanic. Well, I posted some images of like bloody symbols on walls and stuff, and had some of the Satanists come in and be like, that's not real Satanist. The pentagram was drawn incorrectly. And I had to let them know that that's because the people who drew these were kids who were being instructed to do it by sick pedophiles.
Wow.
Right. And yes, they do technically call themselves Satanists. So while I understand that these are a fringe satanic or pseudo-satanic cult that do not represent the majority of Satanists, they certainly don't represent the Church of Satan that we see publicly.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I'm not going to call them what they call themselves. So what else do I call them here? Right.
Satan adjacent.
Pseudo-Satanist is what other like Vice and other places have resulted to, which I would just assume to call them Satanists personally.
Right. And then you can't, no one will be happy. You're not Satanist
You're
enough
never
for
going
these
to please
people.
everybody.
So Spitz. Yeah. So Spitz, I believe this is the guy who shot his stepfather.
Yeah, it's a great story.
I think this is the first I saw this from you. And I was like, how? Well, maybe I saw the initial story and thought nothing, like just a crazy person who I think videotaped or live stream videotaped. I'm obviously almost 40. Live streamed a shooting of his stepfather, but then you put a whole new spin on it with everything. So you can take it away with who Spitz is and what the heck happened.
Yeah, so everybody, like, if I describe the video, you might not remember, but if you saw it, most people would be like, oh yeah, I saw that, because it was very viral.
Yeah.
And it was basically a video that Kyle Spitz recorded from his own point of view of his stepdad coming in with a gun. I'm going to shoot you. And he was like, oh yeah, you're going to shoot me. And then like, sure enough, like,
Boom.
and the great thing about that video was that like you could freeze frame it and actually see like down the barrel of the gun and see the bullet coming out of a thing of flames. It was just
Yeah.
like so perfect,
It's a
right?
crazy
Well,
video.
yeah, the bullet missed and hit him, well, grazed his ear, right? So he was okay. But in the video, you see like some blood drops and people screaming. So it's a pretty, I don't know why that video went as viral as it did. I think it's just because he goaded the guy on and then he shot him. Like, it's kind of a fuck around, find out
Yeah.
kind of thing. So when I first saw this video, I didn't think anything of it. But at the time, we had already, like, this was in January, so we'd already been aware of 764 for a while, but we hadn't really investigated them that deeply yet. And what I started to see was I started to see people making claims that they were victims of this guy and that he wasn't just like some victim of a shooting. He was actually a member of a satanic cult, child extortion, exploitation cult. And then my ears perked up and I was like, okay, well, here it is. Not only did we find his profile right away on Twitter and confirm it, but the whole world opened up to us as far as investigating this group that we had they'd been shadowy before. They use certain hashtags to kind of get around. We didn't know what they were. So it's not like we could really see them very often, right? But this brought them right out into our line of sight. We're like, oh, here they all are. They're all on Twitter. They're all on Telegram. We can identify them, we can name them. So when I first started to talk about this, people were kind of just like, you're crazy, whatever. Well, so I kind of dropped it for a while. Well, 2 weeks later, I got a message on Twitter and somebody was saying, Kyle Spitz just killed his mom in a Telegram channel and posted a video. And I said, okay, you can send me the video and I'll see what I can do. Have you contacted the police? And they're just kind of frantically, no, we haven't, blah, blah, blah. Well, I look at the video. It didn't show him killing his mom, but it's definitely his dead mom. Yeah, there's blood, a lot of blood. It's a really
And
disturbing
we see her in the
video.
initial video you described. She's like in the hallway, kind of.
She had her pants at her ankles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now she's dead.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Just 2 weeks later. The video is really disturbing because Kyle's videoing it and he's like, it seems like he's faking being upset. I don't know how to describe it. He like gropes his mom's breast. Like it's very weird.
That's right. I immediately suppressed a lot of this the second I remember reading. I'm like, this is fucking dark.
Well, the funny thing is, like that night, right? I had been working on the Highland Park stuff, and I had a big breakthrough in the Highland Park investigation, and I was like, "Yeah, good job to me." And I poured myself a bath and a glass of wine. I was going to celebrate, and then I got this message, right? And I was just like, for the rest of the night, I contacted a fusion center, which is like a DHS kind of funded, basically helps you connect between states if you have like a federal crime to report in another state. Because I thought that he killed his mom. I mean, it looked like evidence of a murder.
Right.
It needed to go to the police.
Right.
And so I sent that to them and they called me back and notified me, which I thought that this was really weird. But you tell me if you think that this is weird, okay? So this was a death that had just occurred like within 48 hours or less. And I sent this information to the Fusion Center and they escalated it to the local police in Tennessee. And then they called me back and said the police in Tennessee confirmed that Melanie Spitz, the mother, that she is deceased. And they said that it's a suicide.
Oh, that's weird.
But it only been 48 hours. And I was like, first of all, it didn't look like a suicide. Right.
Like,
and
I wonder why, like he
Which
filmed
is
himself.
weird because
Did he film himself? You said you didn't see him in the video shooting her, right?
No, I didn't see anything. No, I didn't see anything, but there was blood, like an unsurvivable amount of blood.
Oh, wow.
But
he's filming
he
the
was
aftermath.
moving the body. He had blood all over his hands. It looked like he
Right,
tried to wipe his hands off.
What did they say
Very
beyond that? Did you
suspicious.
know, like, beyond that, where was the gunshot wound? What happened?
Well, they didn't tell me anything else, but I remember saying to the guy, that's kind of weird because like you said it's been less than 48
Takes a little
hours.
while
So it
to
doesn't
get
seem like
back.
there's been enough time for the police to have conducted an investigation. It doesn't seem like they'd just be telling random people that.
Right.
Right.
What do
And
you
then
make of
later
that?
on, we'd find out that it wasn't a suicide. It wasn't, we bounced back and forth about it, but it turns out that the official story was that she died from a fentanyl overdose.
So where did the
and
blood
that the
come from?
blood came from, like, I guess, a hemorrhage or something.
Wow.
It's very suspicious.
And Spitz is where, like, after
But they
that.
told me suicide. Like the police told me that, which I thought was very strange.
I'm sorry,
that
but
it didn't end up being the official narrative.
but the son, like, where is he after all that?
So he went to a mental institution after that. But at the time we were still trying to get the police to listen to the feds, right? To listen to the victims and to try to investigate the fact that he was part of this child abuse network. So I started to post about this, and again, people were not paying attention until the federal charges were revealed, and that's when people started to be like, "Holy shit, that was true."
Yeah, that all happened like how long did that? A month or a few weeks?
It was like a span of a few weeks. Yeah. So we worked really hard getting all that information to law enforcement and helping them, helping the victims find, advocating for the victims who felt unheard. They felt like Law and Crime had put out, Law and Crime YouTube had put out a video with Kyle Spitz where they interviewed him and they were treating him like a victim. Like, oh yeah, we're so glad you're okay. And your mom, blah. Those guys never responded to me. I let them know immediately, like, hey, this woman from your video is dead. And also, this guy is not a victim. And they never responded. They never retracted it. They never did a follow-up piece. Law and Crime didn't want anything to do with it.
Is it still up?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's interesting.
You would think that, like, if you did an interview with somebody like that and their mother was
100%.
involved, and then I messaged you and it's like, hey, this woman that you were talking to is dead.
It literally
and her
happened.
son's under investigation, and you're Law and Crime.
When I was writing this story about the serial killer, I reached out to a mother of one of the victims. Well, actually, she was this girl was found dead on the graveyard on the beach with all the other victims, but for whatever reason, she has not been identified as a victim, although she was strangulated, like the hyoid bone broke. And so I'm talking to her mom. And then a few weeks later, her mom is stabbed over 200 times to death by her other daughter. So I'm like, well, that's insane. The daughter went and snapped and stuff. So yeah, I mean, that changed the whole trajectory of that story.
Yeah.
You know? Now, obviously, I want to update all of that. So it's very bizarre.
Yeah. Right,
I wonder
you
if
wanna
it goes
update it
back. If it goes back to them being like, we can't even. This is just too complex and too dark.
Yeah, it was. And there was even more weird stuff. Like, for example, Kyle Spitz's biological dad talked to one of my reporter friends, Ken Silva, and he had him on video going back and forth. First, he was saying, no, she wasn't murdered. It was an accident. And then he said, oh, she took her own life. And then at one point he goes, Kyle had nothing to do with his mom's murder. And Ken Silva goes, hold on, can you just why did you call it her murder? And he's like, oh, you better not publish this. And then he says, I am a federal contractor out of DC. I have a secret security clearance. And if you say anything about this, I'm going to give it to a PR department and I'll sue you.
Great.
And that's when we go, what the hell? And so, because also his mom worked for Lockheed Martin.
Lord Almighty.
Because of course she did. So there are these little complexities in the case that were just like,
it's
what
weird.
is happening?
There's another story.
Why do they give meth addicts security clearance here? What is happening with our government?
I think we've spun out of control, and all of these operations have just taken over, and we're living in like an aftermath where there's just little pockets of it, but they're everywhere. You know, like Gladio,
weird.
Ultra, Lockheed Martin, for sure. There was
life got into a tailspin.
Well, that's the problem with all this.
For
Like,
a few weeks.
how do you even keep grounded?
Yeah, and then I had his friends start to threaten me.
Of course.
And I had to call the police and file a police report. And then the FBI called me and we're like, okay, well, you're the victim in a federal investigation now. And it was the whole fucking thing, man. It's just been really overwhelming. But I'm blessed to have been able to be at the front lines of this. I have not stopped reporting. I will continue to report. I continue to receive multiple death threats every day from this group. And I continue to push forward. I'm not going to stop reporting on it. I let them know that I'm not going to stop reporting.
And thankfully, you're also a good shot. For those who don't know, you shoot a gun fairly well. Are you an instructor or something?
Pretty well.
Or? Yeah.
Oh, well, I was a pro competitive shooter for years and years. Yeah.
Crazy.
I say was because I injured my shoulder, so I've been out of the game for a couple of years now. But yeah.
And you've been a PI for how long?
Probably around 7 years or so.
And what made you get into that?
So because of my shooting background, I've been a women's self-defense instructor and a handgun instructor for a long time. So I am a licensed bodyguard. I actually have like the highest level of armed personal protection
Damn.
clearance too. And so I started to do security work. And then in Texas, you can have, as a security officer, you can basically get your PI license with like no extra credentials. And so I figured I might as well.
Right.
But most of that, the real life stuff was like cheating spouses and child custody stuff. But I started to get more into the online stuff
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
So when I say PI, like I'm not doing this kind of investigation under my license.
Right. It's just
you
for
know?
fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a
But
hoot. Yeah, I tell you.
I love getting death threats. So you say you're a mother, right?
Yes.
How do you feel about the future your child's going to inherit? Like, what has changed in the way you see the internet and your child, and how do you
It's horrifying.
reinforce safety moving forward?
It's a living nightmare. I think that's been probably the biggest struggle that I have is like, having a kid and seeing all of these horrible things happen. How do we protect our kids from this kind of thing? Every day I get closer and closer to just telling, just like off the grid life where my kid has no access to the internet.
Right.
But then I take it back. I'm like, that's crazy. You're being crazy.
Right.
You want your kid to have a normal life. And I think I joke about this, but it's not a joke. It's real. When I started to really research all of this child exploitation stuff, going back to Twitch, when I exposed the giant predator network on Twitch years back, I think that my daughter, I've always warned her about bad guys, not, so my kid's never been afraid of monsters or anything, never. Right. But also, I think that I went a little too far. And like she kind of got like an anxiety complex, and I had to so now we're having to dial it back because I think panicked old mom maybe was a little too overbearing and too foreboding about bad guys at a young age. She wasn't quite old enough, so now she's, instead of monsters under her bed, she's afraid of bad guys breaking in.
I mean, I am too. I get it.
I feel bad about it,
I know.
because I'm like, okay, at some point you have to be like, okay, I went a little too far.
I think I have two kids, a third on the way, and I dread the world they're going to inherit because it's not. I mean, it's unique that the technology, that aspect that we have now, has accelerated. Speaking of accelerationism, all of the darkness, right, and the evil and the violence, because it's been dark forever. But I can't imagine what it's going to be like in 5, 10, 15 years, and that's what the accelerationists want.
And, one of the things that I advocate for is, I say it's threefold. We advocate for child safety. We advocate for parental awareness and education. And then we advocate for big tech accountability, because in a lot of cases, these big tech platforms, as much as I don't like the idea of regulating, and I don't support online safety bills that are Trojan horses for digital ID stuff. And I could see through all of that, but I also see that big tech, by remaining complicit and accountable for this stuff and not doing anything, allows the government to go, look at this huge, horrible problem. We need to step in with regulation. And it's because big tech is not doing their part, because they're not taking child safety seriously enough on their own, that the government is able to kind of step in and be like, well, we have to solve this problem for you guys,
I feel like it's going to get there.
It already is. And they're pushing for this online safety bill now. And of course, the guise is, it's to protect the children. But really what they want to do is completely do away with internet anonymity.
Yeah, which is a huge problem, I think.
Yeah, I do too.
Even though there's a lot of weak people who hide behind anonymity, I'd rather them have that than making everyone sign up for some ridiculous thing.
Well, so number one, we have to fight these criminals, because there's pedophiles out there who are hurting our kids, and we need to stop them. Number two, I think more important than big tech stuff is to informing parents about the risks, because it's really not, people tend to get really judgy and be like, well, my kid would never be a victim of that because I'm such a great parent. And you'd be amazed at how many parents just like that end up with their kids victims, because they're not tech literate enough. And because they're complicit, because they close their eyes and go, oh yeah, or they're complacent rather, right? They just say that would never happen.
It's just they're on Roblox all day. They're fine.
Yeah,
Meanwhile,
they don't understand. So parents need to be educated too, and know how to talk to their kids about online safety. And so I hope to advocate for that. And if anyone takes anything away from this, it's like, you really do need to helicopter your kids online. You have to helicopter your kids online. You have to see everything you have to have godlike vision of everything they do.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to be kind of tech savvy.
Yeah, true.
You know?
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like, well, we don't, have a lot of, I'm almost a Luddite. Obviously, I'm not, because we're doing this right now on Zoom. So I do appreciate technology to some degree, but I also detest a lot of technology and what it's done to modernity, and it's made us bankrupt of morals. Obviously, on a whole, it's on a whole scale, because there's like obviously not evil people, but you're accepting a lot of I don't know, depravity into your life, but with a lot of these modern luxuries. And then the evil people take advantage of it, and they prey upon your kids. Like this same thing with that story I did in Ohio with the child predators. Even though some of those guys were just dumb, they're infiltrating your child through Roblox, and all these things, just pretending to be some imaginary younger person on these websites.
What are the pathways of prevention? What all can we do, right? There's, first of all, we need to people like me and my group of researchers, investigators who go out of our way for free to track these guys down. But some of the stuff that we've been doing, that we've been able to provide to police, is the identities of some of these anonymous figures online, and trying to figure out who they are so that they can go to jail.
Yeah.
So hunting, hunting these people online is one thing. We need more resources, I think, for law enforcement. Not more authority, because anyone can do it, right? Just more resources. And I think that the second thing is, obviously parents. We need to advocate for parent education. And then third, we do need to keep being loud and keep being annoying towards big tech, and keep advocating for them to take it upon themselves to, actually take more action on these things. Like, one thing that Twitter can do is ban the hashtags that they use to get around.
Right.
They've done that plenty of times. That doesn't infringe on anyone's right. It doesn't require ID verification. It doesn't do anything except just constantly monitoring the landscape and being aware that these are the hashtags that you need to eliminate. They do that with child predator networks and stuff.
You know what I worry about, though, is them just then changing their hashtags to something else, and how much harder will it be to find it?
Well, but that's why you have people like us who monitor it. We tell Twitter all the time, you need to ban this hashtag.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of little things that they could do that don't require infringement of our rights.
Yeah.
That they're not doing.
It's almost like, obviously, the evil stuff, especially going after children, has been happening for ages. And like I said earlier, the internet has accelerated that, but it's also given people like you the chance to weaponize the internet against them. So hopefully there's some balance there, which I appreciate. Before I let you go, BX, I did want to ask you, what will you do when you become a viral sensation on Twitter and everyone thinks you're a psyop?
Oh man,
is it going to happen? And what
are
your thoughts?
That I posted that and then I manifested it, because then I had a post go like viral-ish afterwards, and I had people going like, "You're a psyop," and I was like, "Oh no, it's happening."
You brought it on yourself right away.
People are so sensitized to this idea that anything that goes viral is a psyop, and I think a lot of times it is.
It does feel like that. So many
so then I worry that I will go viral and people will think I'm a psyop because I've conditioned them to do that.
Well, you've had somewhat of a presence. I mean, online. Some of these people, they came out of nowhere.
Yeah, from obscurity to viral sensation to left hand of Nick Fuentes in a picture. Yeah.
But then not the day after.
Yeah, then the competing influence operations knocked them out. It's almost like these, I don't know. Hey, Shane, I mentioned to you before, like this movie called Branded.
Yeah.
Did you ever actually watch that
I have
movie?
Not, no. Tell me again about that. Why should we all be watching that?
So you shouldn't. Honestly, it's a terrible movie. But you'll appreciate the concept, which was like this influence operation enacted by a fast food company because people were too healthy and they wanted to kind of make fat cool again so that they could get people to buy fast food. And so they have this huge, elaborate influence operation with this viral story where this obese woman died. And it's a long thing, but at the end, it's like he's hallucinating the brands fighting each other like Godzilla in the street. So it kind of unravels. It's kind of Russian, a Russian movie. So it's a little bit weird. But anyways, the concept of it is like worth watching it for, but that's how I see some of this stuff now. These like competing influence operations like Godzilla, like fighting each other.
Yeah. I mean, don't we know that I believe. So the official story says in 2015 or 2016, didn't Russia supposedly set up 2 different type of protests for people on either side of the protest in America, like
probably.
through online, sort of what we're talking about operations, but more political focused. And that happens
it's
all
all
the time.
theater.
Yeah, it's all theater.
Yeah.
Well,
The whole world is a stage.
Perfect way to end this. BX, please tell people where they can find you online. Tell them again about your Substack, and yeah, let them know.
Yeah, we're working really hard on getting some of my work published on Substack. It's BX Writes. And then probably my biggest presence right now is Twitter, BX_on_X on Twitter/X.
Awesome.
Yeah, I release a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm hoping if you go to my Twitter, you can look at I put like a mega thread there, so you can kind of go through each of my little arcs that we talked about here and go down the rabbit holes as much or as little as you want. And I'm hoping to get a lot more content like produced. I just have a day job and a kid.
Yeah,
so it's hard.
and you do make art while talking about psychopathic Satanists,
I do, yeah.
right?
I do make art. You can actually watch me make art, and you can buy my art as well.
Where can they find that?
It's on my Twitter,
Cool.
well, I'll give you my link.
Yeah.
Because it's like a lot, but I'll give you
Perfect.
my Beacons link. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it and hope you have a great day.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Crazy. It's a crazy world, people. It's a dark, crazy world. I highly advise you checking out the stuff that BX is doing and reporting on. It's wild. So since we had to do this last minute pre-record, we had no callers lined up because it was so last minute. I'm so sorry about that. But we have Wesley. And Wesley.
Sorry, guys.
No, Wesley and I have had so many good conversations about all of the weird, dark, inverted stuff in both of our lives. And it turns out
when I got here, like in the royal sense, like when I became an employee,
in the royal sense.
Yeah, I don't know. Well,
I heard trumpets.
when I got here today.
I heard trumpets. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
No,
on Earth, you mean?
Yes, yeah. When I was born. No, so I sought this man out. It was like I have so many things I have to talk to you about.
That was an awesome day. That was so much fun. And we did. And
yes.
Man, I don't even know where to start. But well, I guess we could start.
We've been talking about Atlantis for almost 2 years.
We even traveled to Tony Merkel.
Yes, yeah.
To talk about Atlantis.
Mm-hmm.
And
it never came up.
We talked for 4 hours or something.
Yep.
Shout out to Tony and the confessionals. I'm sure people watching know Tony, but if you don't, you got to look him up.
The best dude.
He is the best. We had a great time. You can find that episode on YouTube right now with me and Wesley. But somehow we didn't talk about Atlantis.
We did not.
But maybe
we did get a whole bunch of food spilled on us at the Texas Roadhouse, as I recall.
Oh my goodness, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the lady there was basically telling us that she believed in that part of Tennessee there might have been the Havana syndrome.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yeah,
she's like, she came to our table. She's like, do you guys hear that ring or something? That high pitch?
Yeah.
Like, are we getting Havana syndrome right now? And then
you don't know. And Tony was like, you have no idea what table you just walked up to.
We all took out our notepads like, tell us more, please. So before we started recording, you were telling me about there's a thing happening at your house.
Yeah. So it's been happening since moving in, which was November, mid-November. And it started out really slow, just little stuff. And then it quickly plateaued.
What was the little stuff before we get to the plateau?
So the first thing that happened was voices. And it was and why I would say that's little is because
I mean, that's kind of big.
It is, but it seemed little because we thought that there was a reasonable explanation.
Okay.
So it was like, we can hear the neighbor on one side of the house. There's only 4 or 5 feet between their wall and our wall.
Okay.
And these are houses, by the way. So it's literally it's so weird. Houses are not normally like this. Our house is back set, his is front set, and they kind of cross like this.
Are they attached?
No.
So there's a little space?
There's a little
4
space.
to 5 foot space?
Yeah, it's super small.
Oh, wow.
And so there's a window on his side and then a window on our side. They're always closed, but it's just a little crossover, a little overlap.
Weird.
And they're really close together. but the majority of his house is out.
Okay.
The majority of ours is the other direction. And we were like, okay, so that's what that is. Until, and this was the crazy part, one night, we were in the room where you would hear that from, right? And then on the other side of the house, just there's nothing. It's a field, essentially. And like it's even weirder because there is a street across the street, but it's like 10 feet down. There's like a retaining wall and it goes down. And so there's a house across the street with the people that wear the Young Turk shirts, which is hilarious.
That is hilarious.
But you can't hear them at all. There's a earth blocking it and a cement wall. So we're in the side of the house where like if this was the wall to that house, you'd be like, oh, it's coming from right there. It's him. And his voice is very, very easy to distinguish.
Right.
And I'm not going to say why, but it's a very unique voice. And this voice was different and came from the other side of the house.
Oh boy.
And it was not like, you know, how you can just like with how reverb works and how like if something sounds far away or close, or you can kind of tell if it's a TV or if it's a real voice because of the way it bounces through the room. This was a real voice in the bedroom.
Yeah.
And then I realized that my dog, who is always my shadow, was in that room alone.
Oh boy.
Which she does not do. Like she is attached to me at the hip.
Right. Can you say your dog's name?
Charlie. She is always where I am.
Love it.
And
but this time, for whatever reason.
Yep, she was alone. And actually, we were doing a Bible study. And
what were you? Where in the Bible?
Genesis.
Okay.
And
first thing we ever talked about, actually, I think, was Genesis.
Yeah.
And
Begot was where we were.
Yep.
And I was like, time out. And it was like somebody talking to my dog. And I went in there.
Voice?
Huh?
Can you describe the voice?
It sounded like me.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. It sounded like me, but like not exactly. Like it sounded like somebody who could be my brother. You know,
right.
Yeah.
There's a certain intonation there that sounds like you, but it's just a little off.
Yeah. So like it sounded like somebody who has a voice similar to mine, but doesn't have the same exact, like I have a kind of a baritone, not very heady voice. This was one that sounded a little bit more average sounding, but same, like it had this, it was more baritone, sort of like you actually, sort of that same kind of voice. And it sounded like it was like trying to keep it down. And like the hair on my arms was like up. And I went in there and the dog was just sitting there kind of like not looking at the door, not looking at me coming into the door, and just kind of sitting facing the other way, which also strange. And I don't know, like at this point, other things had happened. Like Taylor had been woken up in the middle of the night by hearing, "Hey!"
Oh boy.
Like 2 or 3 times, like somebody like screaming right in her face.
Wow.
And Charlie Charlie typically is like asleep, but she was standing up looking at Taylor. And Ian suggested that it was Charlie telepathically communicating with her, trying to say like, I have to go out.
As like, Ian would.
Ian would.
Okay.
But then another strange thing happened. Like there were a lot of like little things that I don't particularly remember. One was just suddenly it was 2 a.m. and I was like trying to fall asleep and I was looking out the bedroom door and suddenly it was light in the living room.
What?
Like just the light.
What time of day did you say it was?
Like 2 a.m. And not like daylight. It was like a blue glow.
Oh, wow.
And it's sort of like if a TV was on.
Yeah.
But it didn't like blink. It was very slow.
Whoa.
And rose. And it wasn't still. It was like almost like blue, but like a candle.
Whoa.
But it was really bright. Like bright enough to where like you lose the detail in the wall.
Wow.
Like overexposed to the eye. And I just like jumped up and ran out there. Gone. By the time I crossed the threshold of the door, gone.
What?
And so my instinct was that somebody was shining a like a LED light through the front window,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hitting the living room. And I was like, that's got to be it. That explains the movement. It was like a hand.
Right.
So I tested that, went outside with the flashlight, held it through, and I was like, this doesn't work because I could see every line from the blinds.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
And-
All the shadows were gone.
Yeah.
When you were seeing it.
Yes, no shadows. It was like it was happening right there.
Yeah.
And I also tested the TV, like turned the TV on to the like,
Aux or something.
yep, and it just doesn't light up that side of the room because
Wow.
it's facing the wrong direction, and it would completely fade by that point. But it was bright right there, and I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then
Did you just go back to sleep after that? Like, what?
no, I called Brian. Called Brian, and he was like, "All right, take 24 photos from every different angle."
Oh yeah, that's right. He's great at that,
yeah.
dude. Yeah.
And he ended up like staying the night a few times.
Wow.
With, like recording equipment, things.
Yep.
Nothing.
I knew he was there.
Yep. And it really did act up every time that I cracked open a Bible, which is the
Wow.
crazy part. And then it kind of died off for a while. And then recently it's been picking back up to where things are moving across rooms. Like there was some stuff setting on like the shelf in the bathroom, and just for no reason, it launched from that shelf against the shower wall and into the shower.
Like, are these certain things that it's weird? Like, do you think they're specific objects? It's just anything they can move.
No, it was just like bathroom stuff. Like it was like shampoo and
Okay.
and like a toilet paper roll or whatever you have on
Right.
the shelf that's
Yep.
above, and it just and like hard. It hit the wall hard. And then yesterday, two things. A hanger was hanging on like the hanger thing, came off and hit my dog, the other dog, Tucker, in the face. Like went. He's not
What
like
the
in the vicinity. It
hell?
goes and hits him, and he's freaked out.
Yeah,
like
of course.
like not understanding why this happened, and he's 7.5 months old, so he's confused by most things. But nobody threw it at him,
Right.
and nothing. There's no like we were like, okay, maybe it was the air thing. Unlikely, but
Yeah.
check it, right?
Yeah.
Nope, nowhere near it. Can't explain it. Can't explain it. And then last night, just the sound of things that it sounded like glass or ceramic and metal, like having a metal tote filled with ceramic, like picking it up a foot off the ground and dropping it 2 times in a row.
Really?
But there's nothing
Was it from a certain area in the house?
in the kitchen.
You say kitchen?
Yep.
Oh, that's weird.
Which was at the where I was sitting, like with my back to the kitchen, and I had headphones in, like listening to, ironically, like a talk about giants and but it was just boom, boom, and I like during the first one turned, and the other one happened before I got all the way around, ran into the kitchen, and my first thought was like maybe there's dishes in the drying rack and they all fell over. No,
Nothing.
nothing there. The sink only had 2 plastic mixing bowls in them, and that's it. I was like,
What are your theories on this kind of event?
I have no idea.
Are you totally like when it comes to this? Are you thinking demons, ghosts? Like where do you lie?
I don't
with
believe
all
in
that?
ghosts.
You don't.
I mean, I guess I do. I just don't think they are.
What people think they are.
Yeah. Or maybe they are to an extent. I don't know.
What do you think they are? Like what?
I don't know. I don't like because I try to base everything I believe on a biblical explanation, and
Right.
the Bible's unclear about ghosts. It does say that when we die, we don't linger on earth, but it does say that evil spirits do, unclean
Right.
spirits do. So is that a ghost or a demon, or it's both?
Right.
But they do also talk about which ghost? It's the medium that brings back the ghost and is like shocked that she
Yeah,
did it.
yeah. With the king,
Yeah.
not Saul.
Which of Endor?
Oh no. Obviously, in the Bible, there's a
Yeah.
witch.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
Brings
Endor.
back this
Yes.
spirit of
Saul or Samuel.
is it the ghost of Daniel? I can't remember. Off the top
He
of my
goes
head.
and but he goes and
Yes, but
asks
they
for
bring
him
up
to
a spirit.
resurrect
Yes.
or bring him back from the
And
dead.
she does, and she's
Yeah.
blown away because
Yeah.
she's a charlatan.
In a time when witches are like outlawed.
Yeah.
In the Bible, yeah.
and like probably not like real, like they're it's performative or
like the magicians for the Pharaoh type situation.
Well,
what would you say about those? Because
they
they were doing a lot of the things
they were
Moses
doing
was
things,
doing.
yes.
But it seemed like you could interpret it as illusions because at a certain point they can do it.
Or there's a line that the Egyptian gods, which I believe are real, couldn't cross, and then God, like every single curse from the Bible was a specific slam against one of them. Like it's like you can't do this, and you're the god of this. You know.
Yep.
And look at me. You know, the Most High. Misunderstanding about the term God, but I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I also think there is something to the environmental recording theory.
Stone tape?
Yeah, stone tape. And just like that your mind is the antenna.
Yeah.
That
I'm with you on that.
That allows it. And so it's like it's not something that's happening to you, it's something that you're perceiving as happening to you.
You're like receiving it, even though it's only you. It's like a tuning fork in your molars.
Yeah, something like that. And even sounds, phantom sounds.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like it doesn't I don't know how to explain the stuff lying off the wall, to be honest. But,
I think it's hard to explain this stuff. I would just open up. I mean, do you have a certain part of the Bible or prayer you have to help rid yourself of this?
Not exactly. Not like a one I go to. I think the Psalms.
I was just going to say, I referenced them last week too.
The Psalms or just prayer pray as the Lord told you to, like, you know, our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Like, if you don't know how to pray this way, or just invoke the name of Jesus, like, and speak to him. Like, I don't think that I'm not a ritualistic Christian where it's like, this is the exact, you know, it's about the genuine connection you have with the Lord and talk to him on that level.
You just upset all the Catholic listeners.
I know. Sorry, Catholics.
Sorry, Mary.
Yeah. I mean, it's about a personal.
But I feel that like you can pray. I've done that too. You know, encountering evil is what made me have faith after years of none.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, oh, if that kind of evil can exist, I believe that on this planet I've seen balance of life and death. If there's that kind of evil, there's then gotta be. It was like a light switch went off in my head. There's gotta be that.
I think that happened to a lot of people during COVID.
100%.
Like it just, you're like, oh, this is untenable evil, and
a tale as old as time.
Yeah,
it's like this is just what you humans are cyclically trapped in the war of.
I think one of the biggest things that holds people back is they think that people are inherently good and they become bad, and then you realize that people are just inherently flawed,
constantly fighting against the sin nature.
Yep. And like the other part of it is like with what she was talking about. She was phenomenal.
Great guest. She killed it. Yeah.
Talking about isn't it funny that these deep, dark places, it always comes back to the same like horrible things. It's Canaan. It's, you know, it's Tyre.
Ball.
It's the same things. And it, like, you could say that this is just part of human nature and they put a face and a name on it, but it could be the other way.
Yeah.
And like the way around those things seems to be the way that was handed to us by the one who came and rose again. Like it just all fits together too perfectly. And that's with every single, you know, Christians get asked a lot, like, why do you think your one is the right one? It's like, because look what happens to every other one.
Right.
Like they all like devolve into like Baal. Like they all do.
Yeah.
Like they want you to do these specific things. They want to corrupt your youth, just like the people here when it's like, oh no, evil is really just people. Is it? Like, yes, it is. They're the ones doing it, but who is the one pulling the strings? Is it flesh and blood, or is it principalities and powers of the air that our struggle is actually against?
I think it's everywhere.
And
you're constantly fighting it. And there's weaknesses in the defense of your immune system to evil constantly. And you have to learn to be very aware of those weaknesses in your defense, because I think you're under attack at every angle from everywhere throughout your whole life.
Yeah. You know, I did find it really fascinating. Like as she was going down her, like she could have been talking about any case, you know, and like you brought up the point is like, are we just living in this strange like post project, post operation reality where there's just these remnants of these different things, and that seemed really poignant and like true. But they say, like with the Q stuff, remember, like it's Hollywood, it's the government, and it's like, oh, it's just these strange evil people. But every single time they're connected to something, and it's like, no, it is like, why wouldn't they be the ones like this with Manson? Why is he seemingly have some sort of like CIA handler? Why was she told that there was a suicide when that clearly wasn't the case? Like, what is the protection for? What is that? Makes it seem like even though maybe every single individual who's involved isn't tied together like directly, there is something. It's like that show, the Octopus Murders show. It's like there's something. You haven't watched it? No. You're gonna love it. Okay. There's something. There's a core. There is something tying these together, however tangentially and loosely, and that's everything from domestic terror to PDF files to the
any
people who
evil entity.
run. Yeah, it's all
every
tied
level
together somehow.
Yep, I think evil is like unfortunately very intelligent, many tentacled organisms.
Yes.
Speaking of octopi, octopuses. I don't like saying
Hydra.
octopuses. Hydra, exactly. Dude, it's everywhere, and it's like you don't have to be
Hydra
connected.
literally is Operation Paperclip. Like they just put it in your face. That's another thing is like they put it in your face. Like Captain America, the Winter Soldier is like you just told us.
Yep.
And
but they like to.
Yeah, and that like I wanted to interject at one point with she was talking about was it the Order of Nine Angles?
Yeah.
That's what she was describing is the show Archive 81.
Interesting.
Like,
I don't know
on
about
Netflix. It is that to an extent.
I mean, I think a lot of this stuff gets some of it. I have a hard time believing it's all predictive programming because I think some of it just leaks out of the operations. Like MK Ultra was going on for at least 10 years before the guy wrote Manchurian Candidate. You know, then that blew up on the mainstream scene. All of a sudden, people were worried about brainwashed assassins. Yeah. But and then JFK happens a few years later. You know, the movie I think it came out a year before the assassination, and it was like this fear in the air. And I could look back and be like, oh wow, predictive programming. But it's like those people were connected to information that had been, I think, leaked out of these projects. There was like at least 100 sub projects of MK Ultra, and it wasn't. I mean, it was a secret, but there was obviously a lot of people who knew about it.
Yeah, but it was all of these things are like onions of like what do you think you know, and then the predictive programming. Like some people say they put it out there so that you're open to the idea and accepting it, and it's like no, it's so that you look at it and go, that can't be real. It's a movie. You got the idea from the movie.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
And
you discredit the reality that it's actually that bad.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, you're just saying that like you want to live in a movie so bad that you're willing to say that people are like this, and it's like, but and then sometimes I think that there is the explanation that makes sense that they allow stuff out that is way worse than reality, so that when you automatically go towards the worst thing and like look at this and it's easily disprovable, and it disproves the 75% things that aren't quite that deep.
Right.
And it's like, well, if that's not true, then none of it's true.
I know you have to look at everything with skepticism, even like the way you're describing your situation in your house. Your gut feeling is to be like, it's got to be like the dishwasher.
Yeah. That happened, and like I have told myself that it was my puppy Tucker in his crate, like messing with the crate. Maybe, but like it was really loud.
And the light thing is also very bizarre.
It was really bizarre.
And also, like, I grew up in a really old house. People have heard me say this a lot on the show now, but a really old house, a lot of weird things going on. And no matter what dog it was that we had throughout my life in this house, at night, my dogs would always stare at the same part of the hill on the side of the house. Like they were hearing something. Jeez. Every dog. Those dogs didn't know each other. So like it would be like one died. Yeah. They're just passing stories of this old house to each other as they come in the house. But no, it was like totally random.
That is weird.
They'd walk outside, and the second they heard it, they were staring at the top of the hill. It was always at night.
Yeah.
It didn't happen at the day, which always made it interesting. And it was very dark. There's no neighbors.
Could it have just been that they didn't like that they couldn't see it?
Maybe.
Tucker does that. He stares in the darkness, waiting to see something.
Yeah, they know. It's almost like children too. They have like the veil is thinner. You know.
Yeah, and that's why like when that happened, I like went and got Tucker and Charlie and was like, let's go in the kitchen and see how you feel about things. And they were like totally fine, and I was like, okay. Well, I put them back and then went back to the couch and continued my night, and nothing happened. Like I'm not a like this must be a scary thing person.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
not. Like I do find those things fascinating. 100%. I like to listen to confessionals. I like to listen to
Yep.
the people on here.
Yep.
I enjoy that. But like I have a normalcy bias to
Yeah.
where I don't want those things around me. I don't want that to be happening. I'm constantly being like, this is what's happening.
Yeah. My
And, like,
perception is just throwing me off. you
yeah.
know?
And the other thing is like, if those things are real, I think I'm fueling them by being scared of them. And like
They
giving
feed
them,
off the fear.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. Like,
I think they do.
whether it's if it's a demon, I don't want to be scared of it. If it's my dishwasher, I don't want to be scared of it. Like,
That's the soundbite. Well, I think at some point I want to have you on it, like officially, to talk Atlantis, because that is a whole situation
Yes.
that I really want people to hear you talk about, and we'll do that.
I will say there's a lot of people that talk about Atlantis.
Oh yeah, well,
but
yeah,
I don't like to talk about the things they like to talk about.
yeah. You've got a whole different angle on
A whole
it.
different angle. And it's not that I have a different theory. It's just the things they find interesting, I don't find interesting.
Right.
They are like, where was it? We're like, look at this place on Earth. And I'm like, don't care about any of that. I care about like the things she was talking about. Like where did the idea come from? What is the genesis of it? What is another, like, is it something we all talk about? Every culture knows about from a different name, like debunking the ideas of Lemuria and all of these things that are like much more modern stories and legends. Like Lemuria it's not a thing from history.
Right.
It's a guy was like, oh, I think that like there were lemurs in India and lemurs in Madagascar that were the same. I wonder if there was a land bridge and that would have been called Lemuria. And then Blavatsky was like, no, Lemuria was this ancient. And it's like, okay, good.
It's just tangent on tangent.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's freaking great.
And then the Tartaria, all that, like
Yep.
it's a totally different thing.
Yep.
And that's I think the Tartaria thing's a psyop, honestly, but to make people look
Speaking
crazy.
of psyops.
Yeah. But no, I'm excited to talk about it.
We definitely do have to talk about it. There's so much to talk about. I'm really glad that you're going to be here. While Alex is away, you're doing a great job already. I really appreciate it. I know Alex appreciates you doing this. And where can people find you on the internet? That's better. You're better off.
The boonies.
Sick.
Filming
Shout out to the
boonies.
boonies.
Shout out to the boonies.
That is I've seen some crazy footage.
Yeah.
From that, and they're building stuff outside this window. So it looks awesome. Definitely check. Where can they find the boonies?
The boonies is on YouTube and Instagram. I think there's going to be a TikTok. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But that's it. I don't know if we're posting that on timcast.com. I think it's going to be
Sick.
like,
Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yep.
You can find
There's
me
a new
at
video
Cashman.
today, actually.
Oh, is there a new? And where, that's on YouTube,
It's on YouTube and-
Instagram.
yep.
Sick. Awesome. You know where to find me at Shane Cashman. We'll be back next Sunday. Please like and share this. That's the best thing you can do to help us with this show, help grow it. We really appreciate all the support the audience has been giving us. Very, very grateful to all the guests who keep joining us. Thank you so much to BX. She was so great today. Check her out online, and we'll see you next Sunday. See y'all.